Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, and this is the Rookie Running Back Preview, Part 1. And I just want to say right here at the start, when we started this show, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now, like this show in particular and the guests that we have today are exactly what I envisioned and hoped to do with this show. We've got Matt Waldman back on the show again. And Matt, I want to just right at the very beginning give you a chance, because I think I've said this multiple times throughout my time at CBS, and I probably said it back when I was a football guy. It's like my rookie research is not complete until the RSP comes out. So please tell everybody what you've been working on and how they can get involved.
Sure. The rookie scouting portfolio. This is my 20th year doing this. So 20 years of publication. It is a combination of an NFL draft guide of scouting reports and fantasy football focused publication. And it's in two parts. I do a pre-draft, which just came out April 1st. It's available for $21.95 at mattwaldman.com. You're going to get a bookmark PDF. And when I say bookmarked, it's heavily bookmarked because it's over 1,200 pages in length with over 165 prospects at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, where I take you through everything. And then there's a post-draft, and that post-draft comes out a week after the NFL draft, where I give you kind of just the quick, how do they fit with their scheme? Here's a cheat sheet based on ADPs I've already been looking at versus where I think the players' talents and fits are. And so you can find sweet spots for, like, if Patrick Mahomes, back in the day when they were like, oh, he's probably not the best of the quarterbacks in this class. And I say, no, he's far and away the number one. You can get him at the beginning of the second round or really the middle to late second round and comfortably get him without a risk of losing him. Here's the sweet spot of how to do that. And I rank, all the players that were drafted and along with free agents in a cheat sheet for you to do that. And you get a newsletter that updates you on the next year's prospects and updates to my rankings during the year. So you get all of that, and you can find it at mattwaldman.com.
mattwaldman.com. If you're serious about playing Dynasty Fantasy Football, if you're serious about digging into these rookies, go do that, guys. Now, I want to also say, like you said, 1,200 pages, and I think people can hear that and think, oh my gosh, I can't consume all of that. The bookmarks make it so easy within the positions to go find that. If you just want to see the rankings, you can go find the rankings. You can also read why rankings suck, which is one of my favorite sections that Matt does. But like, you will, if you just want to go read about one player, it's easy to click 2 or 3 times and go find that one player. It's very well.
It's a choose your own adventure type of reference book. And think about it this way. Most people who are new and they hear the 1,200 pages and their head explodes, really, when you get the post draft, you're going to first think, this is the thing that I'm paying for. You're going to think that because it's just the keep it simple type of approach. But you're going to find that 2, 3 years, 4 years from now, you're going to be sweeping your waiver wire, and you're going to look at your depth chart and go, who is this guy? And then you're gonna go, oh yeah, that I should look up the RSP, and you're gonna look up the RSP and go, oh, this is an unvarnished look at talent, not draft capital. And this guy, and Matt says this guy would be a really great fit in this type of scheme. I should take a chance on him before he becomes a hot commodity somewhere, and you wind up with oftentimes a really good player at a very low cost because that you find that the pre-draft actually has even more value down the line.
Now, I will say that the one of the reasons I'm so excited about the 2 guests that we have on today is because they're not bookends to my career, because my career is not over. But I remember back in the early days of getting paid to do this, when I thought it was still unbelievable that was happening, like some of my early conversations with Matt, he kind of helped bring me into this industry. I still remember that Vegas trip and hanging out with you, and that was so much fun. On the other end of the spectrum, I remember the early days of Jacob Gibbs' career at Sportsline, and I believe it actually started with a different one of the CBS, part of the CBS sports family. But one of the things, Jacob, that you've done as you've grown in this role is you've become I don't know. I tried to come up with some kind of pun about how you're the true media guru, but you find things in the numbers that just blow my mind regularly. You're on Twitter all the time breaking down this class. And Jacob, I just want to kind of kick this off because you've spent as much time in the numbers and in the film on these guys. Like, everybody views this running back class as the focal point of rookie drafts and, for fantasy football purposes, NFL drafts. Have you gotten as excited about the running backs as everyone else, Jacob?
Oh yeah. Just go look at my Twitter page and you will see clearly, because there's so many running backs to like. It's a diverse class, and the true media stuff. I think this will be a really cool balance between like me and Matt here, because he's the nuts and bolts of like film and prospecting. And then like I bring in all this more finite little points, little data points that like I don't know if people are finding, because True Media is new. Like the database only goes back to 2017. And so a lot of this stuff you like really have to dig for, but like, is it predictive? Like that's something people ask me on Twitter. It's like, I don't have enough data to really say that confidently. I think it's just interesting. And it might be predictive, but I need more time to test that. Whereas Matt, like he's been doing this for 20 years. Like we feel pretty good about that process. So I think, what I'm here for is to provide like complementary stats to everything that he has. And I think that'll be a really fun balance. And yeah, man, these running backs are so much fun to talk about. So let's get into it.
So you are going to get the full picture today on Ashton Jeanty, on TreVeyon Henderson, on Omarion Hampton, on Quinshon Judkins, on Kaleb Johnson, on Cam Skattebo, and more. We always start with 3 questions for our guest. And honestly, I could ask these 30 questions about the running backs before we get to the players. But 3 names that I didn't say, Matt Waldman is higher on than consensus. And if you've followed him at all over the years, you'll know that you're not going to look at Matt's rankings and find the consensus Dynasty fantasy football rankings. You're not going to find the consensus prospect rankings. His process definitely delivers different, and I would say better, results. So I want to start with 3 elevated pitches. Matt, these are 3 guys that not in the top 6 of consensus rankings, but you are higher on them. Let's start with Tahj Brooks.
Sure. Tahj Brooks he played at probably closer to 230 pounds during his time at Texas Tech. And as I've joked, I've given him the personal nickname of Lemonade, because I think he's done a great job of turning plays that otherwise would be lemons into lemonade. He is excellent at being able to, he dealt with a lot of penetration into the backfield by opposing defenses. And oftentimes, and so while, you look at rates of players getting stuffed, there's a lot of guys who are in this class who are high on that list because opposing defenses pay attention to these runners because they're good. But he's one of the best at mitigating losses, and the best running backs in the NFL mitigate losses at a high rate. And to me, a mitigated loss isn't so much, some people will say, well, he still gets stuffed, and his stuffed rate may be a certain, might be high in a certain rate. But to me, what's more impressive and more contextual is I don't care if he's stuffed, a certain percentage of the time, if more often he's mitigating the loss from a 7-yard loss to a 2-yard loss.
Right.
That's more important to me. You might go, well, the result's still a loss. Yeah, but it keeps the playbook more open when you've only lost 2 or only gained 1 or something like that, compared to, losing 5 or 7 and shutting down the width of the playbook. So he's good at running around people, running through people, running away from people. He has very strong Le'Veon Bell, Frank Gore-like short area change of direction skills. Very adept at pressing creases and knowing when to bounce it outside, when to stay into the middle of the field and taking what he can get, and when to find the cutback. And he's a good receiver, someone who can win downfield, at least in the college game. So you see that he tracks the ball well. I'm not worried about the speed. We know he's not super fast. 4.52 speed is okay. More than enough. So he may beat some linebackers downfield if they want to use him in that capacity, but he's mostly a check down screen guy who just showed the capability at Texas Tech to win vertical routes, which means, he tracks the ball well. To me, that's what's important. So a very well put together back who processes the field well and can win a number of ways for you. And when he showed up at the combine and delivered the short area explosion that I anticipated he would, it fit the comparisons I already had for him, which were kind of a combo of Frank Gore and Le'Veon Bell. And he bristles at Le'Veon Bell comparisons, apparently, because he thinks of, he's young and he's thinking of Le'Veon Bell off the field and doesn't want to be compared to whatever's going on there. And he brings up Josh Jacobs. Well, Josh Jacobs is a Frank Gore archetype of player. So when he says Frank Gore, I'm like, or he says Josh Jacobs, I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm just older and I've seen more than you, Tahj. So it's okay. It's a similar kind of profile. And what we're seeing from this guy is you're probably going to see him drafted in the 6th or 7th round, maybe as a UDFA at best. A lot of these backs that we like, some people really like, might not get off the board until the 5th round. And we might see multiple backs drafted by the same team in those late rounds. That's going to disappoint us as fantasy GMs, like Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones back in the day in that class. Everyone wants to compare this one to. So it's going to be interesting to see how he fares, but the talent is there if the opportunity arises.
I love this line from the RSP. It said, at the range you can get Brooks. It's a low-cost exercise in finding out if I'm right. And that is a fantastic way. You don't have to make a first-round bet on Tahj Brooks. Just, a little bit later in the draft, let's just see if Matt's right. This guy's probably going to go a little bit higher because I think Damien Martinez a little more on people's radars, but you are definitely higher on him than consensus.
Oh, absolutely. And what's funny is, if the consensus is media, absolutely I'm higher on him than that. If the consensus are people that do draft, that I know who do draft work with affiliations with the NFL, I would say it's a small sample size for me, but I would say I'm about 4 for 4 on that end, that everyone seems to think, yeah, I like Damien Martinez more, or someone like Matt Bowen, who I don't know where he's rated him, might be lower, but the former safety certainly seemed to point out things that he liked about Martinez. And Martinez is one of those guys that he's not going to capture the love that a lot of media will give to running backs, because he's not an elite speedster. They love the elite top end speed. He's more of a smooth accelerator who can flip the field, but he's not a breakaway back. But he's big, he's strong, he can break through multiple tackles. He's a smart runner who can really run multiple schemes, and he can solve problems in the backfield and be able to create and get the yards that your offense needs to stay on track, which coaches really like. They like guys who can manage a game well. Kenyon Drake versus Frank Gore is a good example. Drake was the super speedster, but would knock himself out running into the backside of a blocker early in his career multiple times. And I'm sure Heath has seen that when he was in Miami, and maybe we've seen a little bit of that going on there. Whereas, Frank Gore was someone that you could bring in, and while he frustrated fantasy GMs at the end of his career, because he kept basically blocking promising prospects from playing time, was because coaches could count on him to get the hard yards. Now, so when you look at, you look at Damien Martinez, he does all of that. He's also a good enough pass catcher to be like a leak option guy who can, screen passes, shovel passes, some one-on-ones into the flat, things like that. He's just not used a lot like that at Miami because they ran a lot of 4 verts. And then he wasn't used a lot of that at Oregon State, because when he was at Oregon State, he ran a lot of outside plays, outside zone and toss plays, where you could see more of that acceleration. But when they ran play action, well, guess where they were going? The opposite direction of the perimeter play. So unless you're doing throwbacks to your back on a screen, he's basically the distraction for the defense, and they're throwing somewhere else. So his contribution to the Oregon State receiving game was minimal. But he's overall, he's one of those backs that I think the consensus of the people that I've talked to after I did my scouting, we just started comparing notes as I was writing up the book, we were laughing because we're like, this is the guy that everyone's going to pass over, and he's going to end up having like the 10-year career like James Conner, and like he may very rarely give you top 5 production, but he's going to be like that top 15 back that you go money in the bank. Like he's still holding off Trey Benson, right? So that it's that kind of thing that Martinez has the promise to be.
The third back that I wanted to talk about, maybe back, because he's listed in both sections of the RSP, Savion Williams. Is he a running back or a wide receiver, and which one's he better at?
It's close, to be honest. I would say he's a more refined wide receiver who is capable of continuing to grow into the position and be a good outside player who can maybe work multiple positions and give you a lot of damage downfield and yards after the catch. But he is a more talented running back, if you ask me, in the sense that he, based on what he can do right now, his contact balance, his footwork, his speed, his ability to read and set up creases within the scope of what TCU asked him to do, which can be translatable for an NFL team. He has a higher ceiling and a strong floor already, even though, he's like the New York Giants running back that I keep forgetting his name from last year, who was a wide receiver at Iowa and Purdue. What's his name again?
Tyrone Tracy.
Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, he's kind of like Tyrone Tracy in that respect, but he's a way better receiver than Tracy ever was. And I would say that he is a more punishing runner with, in that respect than what Tracy is. Tracy transitioned very well to what they asked him to do. And I think Savion Williams has the potential to do that if they make him a runner. So I think a great team could say, this is what Cordero Patterson could have been if Patterson's ability to translate what was on the whiteboard to the field were better, because that's what kind of hindered him for so long, is that he's not a dumb guy. And that's the thing that I want to make clear with people, because people always go, oh, well, they're not smart enough to do this thing. There are certain types of learning and translating of information that are more difficult for some people than other, and they can be very bright. Alex Smith is extraordinarily bright, but his intelligence to react to what he sees immediately as a passer was slow. And that's what hindered him throughout his career. Cordero Patterson, I don't know whether he's unbelievably smart on book smart wise or not, but what he has trouble with was taking the whiteboard information and then being able to make diagnoses and changes and adjustments of hots and different reads and reading the coverage and being on the same page, and say like a Norv Turner offense early on in Minnesota. But when they said, you know what, let's make you a running back and let's give you toss plays that put you in space like you're a punt returner, and have you run one gap on gap plays or toss outside, and suddenly you're getting probably the best open field runner I ever scouted in 20 years into a simulation where they can do what they do best. And I think that Savion Williams, if he doesn't have those difficulties, and I didn't see anything that would indicate that, at least, he could possibly be the elevated next level version of what Cordero Patterson could have been.
Awesome stuff. Those are 3 elevator pitches from Matt Waldman. Tahj Brooks, Damien Martinez, Savion Williams, and Jacob was in the chat saying, I've got a really cool Damien Martinez stat. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, first off, I love the distinction that he just made about that IQ and that processing. And I think that comes into play with both the running backs that he hit on with Damien Martinez. And I think Tahj Brooks might be the best processor that I've watched in terms of being able to read things quickly and react and improvise. So Martinez, it's borne out in his stats. He's just like an unbelievably efficient rusher. These are running backs that were drafted around 5 or higher since 2017 that hit the following career thresholds. It's a rushing success rate above 55% and yards after contact per rush above 4. It's Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, Jonathan Taylor, and Zach Charbonnet. So those guys were all great in college. Were all drafted high. Javonte Williams obviously had the injuries. You could say the same thing for Travis Etienne. Martinez would join that group if he's drafted around 5 or higher. The other thing is that he was the second best back in short yardage situations. So not only does he have the improvisational stuff that we've talked about with being able to read defenses, but he's also just great at using his power to create in short yardage situations.
Awesome stuff. Let's take our first break and then we'll jump into Ashton Jeanty.
Guys, can you feel it? Legends were born here. History was made here. These are hallowed grounds.
Hallowed grounds?
The NCIS squad room?
Well, I wasn't talking about that, but I was talking about Augusta National.
All right. It's finally time for the Masters.
I hear it's a tradition unlike any other.
We are back and we are going to talk about the consensus 101 in rookie dynasty drafts, maybe the consensus 101 at some point in just straight up dynasty drafts. Jacob, I want to start with you. And listen, it's kind of a weird situation because we all agree, I think, that he is by far and away the best running back in this class. At the same time, how much time do you spend on the guy that everybody's already made their mind up taking 101 and ranking as the top running back? So Jacob, just give us a few numbers or your impressions of just how good Ashton Jeanty is.
So good. We could take as much time as we wanted. I had a friend ask me the other day, he's like, is this guy legit? And I monologued about him for 10 minutes. He's like, I didn't even know I was that interested. And now I'm like extremely excited for football season to be back. I'm like, yes, Jeanty is so fun. All that I want to add on Jeanty, you guys already like have heard almost everything. I feel like it's obvious what he does as a rusher. But some people nitpick his receiving profile because he didn't get a ton of receiving last year or like overall. But in 2023, he had 569 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. He had a 13% first down per route run rate and 3.33 yards per route run. He avoided 24 tackles on 43 receptions. Those are all just absurd. So I absolutely think he can do it as a receiver. I think that, Boise just kind of figured out like we don't necessarily need to get him the ball that way. We can just pound it over and over and over on the ground. But yeah, he's so good. I could add stuff on the rushing, but I think it speaks for itself. I think it's pretty obvious.
Matt, I went through the process this week. I was updating my dynasty tiers, and I haven't added the running backs to the rankings yet because especially the running back position, draft capital and landing spot matter so much. But I put Ashton Jeanty in tier 1 with Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. And I try not to give away too much from the RSP, but one of the things I always tell people I look at pretty early on when I'm consuming all this information is you'll do running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end rankings over the kind of a composite of the last 3 seasons. And I go to look at the running back position, like just how high is Matt on Ashton Jeanty? And he's not just in the same tier as Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, but he is listed as the best back of the last 3 years. Does he deserve a tier of his own? Should he already be the best running back in Dynasty?
No, but
Okay.
he's certainly in tier 1. So like to me, the tiers, like you alluded to, the tiers more important than the rankings.
Right.
So, there are things about Bijan Robinson's game that are better than Ashton Jeanty's game. But at the same time with Jeanty's game, there are things that he does well that Bijan doesn't. And when I rank players, oftentimes with scores, what happens is that, maybe Jeanty's better coming out of school than Robinson was as a decision maker. Maybe he's better in some ways as a pass protector or a receiver than what Robinson was. But they were both good enough and will be good enough to see the field. So really in that sense, they're going to, it's going to come down to their fit within the system. But as a talent, just as a pure talent, what makes Jeanty special and possibly the kind of player who might fit the hype that he's getting pre-draft, which is rare, is that he has what I would call run stamina. And when you think of the great backs in football, for me, it started with growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, and hearing stories about Jim Brown from my parents and grandparents. And then, watching Earl Campbell alongside Bigfoot and Andre the Giant in the 1970s, and then seeing Walter Payton and William Andrews, and then starting to study players and seeing guys like Barry Sanders and Adrian Peterson and we could move on to probably Marshawn Lynch as the last one that I would put in that range. All those players I just mentioned, when they begin a play and it's a long run, you often see that they break a lot of tackles and make a lot of people miss, or at least multiple tackles or multiple people miss. And at the end of runs, they look like they still have more energy to dictate terms than the people chasing them down, and that they seem to overcome that. Ashton Jeanty has that kind of run stamina. He's not a power back in the way that, a lot of those guys I mentioned are. But I also mentioned Barry Sanders. He's not Barry Sanders in moves, okay? He's more of a Dalvin Cook, D'Angelo Williams type of player. I would say D'Angelo Williams is the comp that I have for him. J.K. Dobbins, if J.K. Dobbins could have stayed healthy and stayed on the Ravens, I think he had that kind of upside. He's the type of player that you'll watch him and he'll break a 60-yard run, and in the first 15 yards, he probably made somebody miss at least once. He breaks a tackle or bounces off a hit and breaks a tackle. And then at the end of the run, he makes two people miss and then carries two people into the end zone from 15 yards away, or is able to work through contact. And when you're tired as a runner, you can't move as dynamically and make those types of adjustments if you don't have that run stamina. And very few backs have that. So considering that he's carried the ball as much as he does, he's getting as much yardage as he is, and he's still doing this at the end of games, that's a special quality with him. So I would say that's the standout thing about Jeanty, is that, he has good contact balance, but it's really more of a, you're not going to get a clean shot on me. And I'm so good at starting or bending around or seeing and eliminating angles that it looks like someone bounced completely off of him. And it's more of an optical illusion more often than not, where it's like, yeah, that wasn't much of a hit, but the fact that he mitigated the angle so well that it looked like he bounced off that hit is special.
Jacob, I just want to put his value in context a little bit more. You and I share a dynasty league together, at least one, and I have the 101 in that league in this upcoming draft.
Yeah.
You, and I wasn't even going to mention the fact that I have the 101 because I traded for your pick. But if you want to bring that up, you can bring that up. And you recently put Devon Achane on the trade block. And I'm just curious to put it in context. Like, what would you be happy to give up in addition to Achane for the 101, which is presumably Jeanty?
Why do I feel like there's a negotiation going on in subtext on this show? Okay, sorry.
I'm pretty interested in this. Yeah, I would give Jeanty Achane in a second pretty easily. I really think Jeanty is going to be the 101 soon. Like what Matt just alluded to is like just icing on top of the cake, but it is like he can handle an entire workload and just wear people down. I've never seen anything like him in his ability to like control when he doles out punishment or when he, just lets it bounce off of him and doesn't take it. Like people talk about the touches wearing him down, and it's like I almost never see him get the wrong end of hits. I think he's going to be so good. Yeah. I mean, I'm not helping myself in these negotiations, but yeah.
Well, I will say, like, I think one of the big takeaways for me is you rarely hear someone talked about as having the ability to carry the load for an entire game and being very explosive. Like usually we hear of a guy who can carry the load for a whole game. We think, yeah, he's probably getting 5 yards max per carry, and he just hammers the defense over and over. If you've got a guy that can do what he does and regularly break off 60-yard rushes, that's going to be a real problem for the NFL. But again, Ashton Jeanty is the 101. He's the number one running back in this class. Almost no one is going to argue with that, but the second running back in the consensus rankings, I've actually seen a couple of people elevate him for some reason ahead of Jeanty. And I noticed, Matt, and I know that you probably don't like being on the negative side of guys, but you are a little bit lower than consensus on Omarion Hampton. And so I guess the first question has to be, why?
Yeah, well, because he doesn't hold on to the ball as well as the other guys who are ahead of him, and it's at a range that's a little bit closer to danger based on the statistical work and analytical work that I do tracking players. Because one of the things that I put out last year over football guys is that after looking at 6 years worth of backs, and I'm probably going to go on 20 years, but 6 years worth of backs in recent times. I looked at all the backs who scored above and below the certain threshold that I have for ball security rate, how many fumbles per carry, and if it's below a certain range, I have questions about whether they have the ability to ride the ride of the NFL and be reliable. And so the backs who fell below that range, only 10% of them, based on their college fumble rates, improved enough to really generate RB2 production or better. Only 10%.
Wow.
And then only 3% were top 10 caliber fantasy running backs at one point in their career. Just 1 out of 6 seasons they had to perform in one of those areas. And only 3% did who were below that threshold. Well, Omarion Hampton isn't below that threshold, but he's certainly closer to that threshold than you would like to see from a big back. He, when I look at his fumble rate right now, 1 per 74.6 touches. He has 373 touches with 5 fumbles. That's pretty low rate, 1 per 74. To me, if you're below like 1 per 60, that's the number. If you're fumbling, coughing up the ball every 60 touches, that's a problem. That happens every other game. That can happen every 2 to 3 games. That's kind of the rate of what it can happen if you're considered the feature back or the main guy. So that's a bit of a lapse. Also, he's not as good of a pass protector as advertised. I think people have trouble projecting pass protection because they look at success rate, but they don't project whether that success rate is, comparable to what you're going to see in the NFL. Just because you get in a guy's way and show effort, that's what I hear a lot of media scouts say is, oh, as long as the effort's there, he's going to be fine. And I'm like, that's great. Donta Foreman had a great success rate, according to some services, but he dropped his head and telegraphed everything that he did. And, defenders ate his lunch in the NFL early on in his career because of the fact that those things don't project well to the NFL. So Hampton has some issues where he overextends and they can just swim right over him and win the interaction. And that happens when you watch some of these plays. And it's a common occurrence against linebackers inside, and while he got better in 2024, he didn't eliminate that issue from his game. It still happened too often. He gets jostled around a little bit too easily where, he can rush his process and he's off balance when he hits. And because of that, defenders get the second opportunity to dictate terms. And so if your pass protection isn't strong, your ball carrying isn't great, those are two things that really just separate him from the other guys. He's still got a grade that says to me, he can contribute right now and he can, and probably even start for you if you need him to, but these are the things you're going to have to watch out for. And that lowers his grade a little bit. And if I was really nitpicking, the final thing I'd say is maybe I think I have a realistic version of who he is, which is kind of a plus version of Tyler Algier, a guy who could start and probably will start and be a really good B back to an A back, B back backfield. Think of like David Montgomery. He could give you David Montgomery type of work. Nobody's going to sneeze at that and say that's bad in Detroit's offense. At the same time, though, I think people are overselling him because they see the size and they see the top end speed. What they're not considering is that his acceleration, his 20 shuttle, which matches what I saw on tape and maybe even slightly better than what I saw on tape, is actually high-end committee level work rather than starter or so he has more trouble getting to that top speed than what people understand. It's like, sure, you run a 4.40, that's great. But if you can't get past the linebackers because your acceleration needs a big runway for that to happen, then you're never going to get to show off that speed nearly as much as people expect. So it's not horrible. His acceleration isn't horrible, but I see him as more of that singles and doubles hitter than a home run hitter who's big. Think Latavius Murray. Think how Latavius Murray came in and people were all excited. He's big, he's strong, he's got that high end speed, but he never really seemed to break away all that often. I think Omarion Hampton's a little bit more along those lines, but just an all-around better running back than Murray was early in his career.
So, Jacob, one of the things I love about having Matt on is I've talked about this a lot during the season. There's certain players, generally running backs, that the fantasy community loves, and we get frustrated with coaches for not giving them the ball as much as we would like. And it's because coaches value different things than fantasy managers do. And Matt often brings us a little bit more of that coach's perspective. So I appreciate that. But I do want to provide the full picture. And he's the consensus Dynasty RB2 for a reason. Dynasty managers love the profile. What's so exciting about Hampton, Jacob?
What's exciting about Hampton is he can play all three downs and he can create yards on his own. For what it's worth, the pass blocking metrics are good, and he was used as a pass blocker a lot. Yeah. I think Matt's perspective is definitely interesting on that, and he knows more about watching and evaluating pass blocking than I do. But I didn't notice any clear problems there when I watched him. What I will say about Hampton is the singles and double stuff is right. He's very, very good. My favorite thing about watching him was his ability to get skinny on runs up the middle. The blocking was not always great at North Carolina, but he was able to turn plays that I think a lot of running backs would have been tackled at the line into singles and doubles rather than, a foul out or whatever you want to use the metaphor here. He averaged 6.5 yards per rush on runs up the middle. Only Damien Martinez had a higher rate on runs up the middle. He had 4.3 yards after contact per run up the middle. Him, Martinez, and DJ Gibbs were the only running backs above 4 yards after contact per up the middle rush. So that's an elite number. I think he's a really interesting guy. If you are into the yards after contact stuff, which a lot of really good running backs do have elite yardage after contact creation, he's up there with some of the best names. If you look at running backs who have had, what was the qualifier? 400 career rushes and have been drafted in rounds 2 or rounds 1. There are only 5 guys who have had over 4 yards after contact per rush. It's Travis Etienne, Bijan Robinson, Kenneth Walker, Jonathan Taylor, Ashton Jeanty, and Omarion Hampton, projected to be in that group this year. What I worry about is if he gets into a situation where it's not a good fit, where they're going to be doing a lot of like outside zone type of rushing. His numbers did fall off there. So like the Pittsburgh Steelers are a team that he's linked to sometimes, that he could go in round 1 to Pittsburgh. I don't think that would necessarily be a great fit. And Jaylen Warren is good. And so like in that kind of situation, I would worry. But otherwise, I think there's a good chance that he's going to just be a bell cow and be really good for fantasy, even if he does have some deficiencies.
So, Matt, I want to like knowing your process. I know that if we go through the NFL draft and Hampton becomes a late round 1 pick, then he's going to move up in the rankings in terms of dynasty, and maybe even an early round 2 pick. I'm not sure how much that distinction matters to you between the last 10 picks of round 1 and the first 10 picks of round 2. I guess how much is that going to matter? And it can even be not just about Hampton, but for all the backs we're going to talk about. When you've got your evaluation like this, and then if a team takes a chance on him at pick 25, how much does that elevate him in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really anybody who scores over an 80 in my process is someone that can contribute right now. So if you put him if you give him an early draft capital is not a predictor of talent. People like to use that as shorthand. It's actually an indication of privilege, because what it is it allows the team doubles down on their investment and says, we're going to give them all the opportunities to fail or succeed that we should. They give more reps. They don't have open competitions in the NFL very often. Well, the fact that James Robinson's coach Doug Marrone had to ask for permission from the front office to allow him to compete for the starting job that first year because the team that had already soured on Leonard Fournette and wanted to get rid of him. That should tell you how things operate because that's indicative of that. So yes, if Hampton gets a first round pick, lands on a team, he's going to at least be one of the top 2 backs early on. And if he screws up as a fumbler or with his pass pro and has some issues, maybe they'll cut back some of those touches, just like with Tank Bigsby, where he couldn't hold on to a ball and he looked great in camp, but then some of the things that he doesn't do well didn't work out. But I'd say that I think that Hampton's a better runner than Tank Bigsby is, and he will probably succeed, and I would give him a higher grade. I like the after contact metrics that Jacob brought up, and I think that one of the things that I like to do in the RSP is I track my own, because I find that, you know, when I looked at like back in the day, Saquon Barkley had a high after contact average per yardage, but when you watched his games, you'd say Barkley was a great back and had the power, but it's inflated. When someone slaps you on a thigh pad because you're speedy and it counts as 75 yards after contact on that run, that's different than Nick Chubb getting hammered by a linebacker through an A gap, runs through him and gets 7 yards with 2 guys wrapping him up. Which one has more gravity to display power? So I break it down by like reaches, wraps, and hits, and I count how many of them are done based on how many times he was hit by a player, not by touch, but how many opportunities someone squared off with them, and then look at the percentages. And then I do that with tackles eluded as well. Now, Hampton shows up pretty well in a lot of these. Like, you know, with wraps, he's among the top, looks like the top 15, broke about 4% of wraps against defensive linemen, which is pretty good. Doesn't sound like a high rate, but that's pretty good against 300-pound dudes. You know, and then I look at it, I separate it by linebacker, and I separate it by defensive back. And you can see that Hampton, he's not the top guy when I look at him from that standpoint. He's actually more in the top 15 to 20 guys who were like higher in those rates, you know, were, you know, I can certainly look at, you know, down the line. I'll look at in a little bit in the next segment here, because I'm looking at the raw data rather than than what I did finalized in the RSP. But, you know, from that standpoint, he has the power. He certainly does. But I would say that that's the fun part to look at this, is that like he's up there and should be fine. Again, the biggest separator for him is, will the pass pro project, and can he hold on to the ball?
That will do it for Omarion Hampton. We're going to take our second break. We've still got 2 Ohio State running backs left. We've got Kaleb Johnson and Cam Skattebo after this. So we're going to start with TreVeyon Henderson, because he's currently the consensus number 3 back in this class. I'll tell you that when we get to Quinshon Judkins after this, Matt's probably going to disagree. But Matt, I'll start with you. My perception on Henderson is that if you're in a full PPR league, you'll probably be a little more excited than if you're in a half PPR league, and a lot more excited than if you're in a non-PPR league. Is his receiving profile where the upside lies? Yeah,
it is. And because he is what people hoped DeAndre Swift would be as a talent. I think that he's a good pass catcher who can get it a little bit better, but still good enough to play right away. He's got that great speed and very strong acceleration. He's a fantastic open field player. So they're going to try and get him in space as much as possible, and they're going to do that with a lot outside runs, draw plays. They're going to use them a good bit on screens, and then also down, different types of schemed passes. So there's a lot of value from him in that respect. And he's a better decision maker than DeAndre Swift ever was, in the sense that DeAndre Swift's one of those players that in Philadelphia, he looked good because you literally had a quarterback and an offensive line that forced defenders on read option, that forced anywhere as many as 2 to 3 defenders to run after the quarterback. And when you take away 2 to 3 defenders at the line of scrimmage to go in the quarterback's direction, you have much easier decisions to make. Now, and I'd say Swift is more of a guy who bounces things outside too often and doesn't really take what's there as often as he should. Now, TreVeyon Henderson can somewhat short circuit a little bit when the play isn't blocked up and goes exactly the way it's designed as schemed. But he is a good tight crease runner, whereas DeAndre Swift would see a tight crease and go, "Oh no, I'm not going there. Let me bounce that outside."
Right.
TreVeyon Henderson goes, "That's blocked up the way it's supposed to be. I can see that, and I'll get skinny and hit it." So he's good at that. But if he deals with penetration or something's off about how it's developing, that's when his footwork short circuits a little bit, and you can see that he doesn't have an answer for what he needs to show there. But you're not featuring him like Damien Martinez or Quinshon Judkins. So most likely you're going to feature him more how you saw Travis Etienne being featured, or DeAndre Swift being featured in Detroit, or Jahmyr Gibbs. And from that perspective, he's absolutely worth one of the top 5 picks in a dynasty draft right now because of how he's going to be used if it's a PPR league.
So Jacob, he talked a lot about how he's what we hoped DeAndre Swift would be. The name that I've heard thrown around more often is, I think, maybe the more optimistic case, just a slightly lesser version of Jahmyr Gibbs. Do you think the numbers, Jacob, justify that comparison? And where do you see the differences between those two?
I don't. I do think Jahmyr Gibbs is clearly a tier above him. And then also, if you just watch them run, they're very different. This is a funny description, but like as movers, I would compare Jahmyr Gibbs to like Allen Iverson and TreVeyon Henderson as like Kemba Walker or something like that. Like he's much more like start stop like jumping around and stuff like that, where it's a different kind of like it bursts and explosiveness. He's very good, but like I don't to me Gibbs is rarefied air. I do, and the other thing is the receiving profile. The pass blocking is really good for Henderson. He had the second most career pass blocking reps in the class behind only Tahj Brooks. And he only allowed a 4.6% pressure rate on those pass blocking snaps. So only Ollie Gordon and LaQuint Allen had better rates among running backs with 100 plus pass blocking reps in their career. That's good. He can get on the field on passing downs for sure. But if you look at his actual receiving production, it wasn't Jahmyr Gibbs. It wasn't anything close, honestly, in terms of yard per out run or total receiving production. I think that could be unlocked at the next level, but it's a projection to put him in that kind of territory. The only stat that I wanted to add on Henderson, and I wanted to get Matt's perspective on this. I hear people speculate that he would be good as like an outside zone rusher, which I think makes some sense given his speed, given his ability to make like one cut and hit it. But for what it's worth, in his career, he was much better as a man gap counter runner than he was on zone runs. 7.6 yards per run on man power runs compared to 5.7 on zone runs. And Ohio State was primarily a zone rushing scheme before Chip Kelly in 2024, and they moved to more man runs, and we saw Hendo was unlocked last year, career best 7.1 yards rush in 2024. So do you think that makes sense, or do you think that he was just at his best last week? It was his 4th season?
No, I think that absolutely makes sense because, see, I always describe it this way. Zone running is very much like multiple choice, whereas man gap running is more like fill in the blank. So
love it.
You actually have to be more strategic behind the line of scrimmage and set your blockers up and be better at processing the field as a zone runner, because I know that Kyle Shanahan has taken some gap runners and made them outside zone runners, and they've had some success. Tevin Coleman was eventually one of them. I would also say that I want to make sure my Levon Kirkland linebacker of a dog wasn't tearing up anything that he shouldn't be, but he's not. I would say that when it comes to those choices, like with Tevin Coleman or with Elijah Mitchell, Kyle Shanahan likes to kind of gapify his outside zone scheme and simplify it, because in most outside zone, you have 3 choices to make. You either cram it up the middle where it's designed, you either cut it back, go behind the flow against the grain, or you bounce it outside. And you have a chance to kind of do all 3. So as a classic outside zone back, I could see how Treveyvon Henderson may not be as strong at that, because I thought he was much better at, here's the decision, manipulate that one area, and if it's not manipulatable, just take what's there and get whatever you can. Use your speed. And with gap, you're really trying to use your speed, and the most of the onus is on the offensive line to do their job and get that one crease open. Like, that's their job. And where in zone, it's more like, get in the way, get in the area, flow it in this one direction, and let the back determine who he's going to set up. So I would say the better processors are zone runners, but the better athletes at the running back position tend to be gap runners. And some guys do both really well. So I think if they transition to him to outside zone's the best transition from man gap blocking to zone, because you can make it more like, yeah, just hit this. I just want you to hit that mark. That's where Trey Sermon had difficulty in Shanahan's offense, is because Sermon was more of a reader type, go slow and read it, kind of like Le'Veon Bell or Frank Gore. And Shanahan just wanted a guy who was more of a gap runner, who was speedy and just hit that thing hard. I don't care if it's open or not, just get there. And our blockers will help you get the push and get downfield.
So you guys really kind of answered my third question. I was thinking more based on the fact that Henderson does need that pass catching role. I'm expecting he's going to be a day 2 pick, but even talking about his differences in the different schemes, it seems like amongst these other backs, he may be as dependent as anybody on what team he lands with and what type of scheme they run, what type of role they have for a pass catching back.
Yeah, and I've got the coordinators that use the most man gap rushing right here. It's the Patriots and the Bengals, I think, are two that could draft a running back that he would fit well with. Potentially the Giants. Dayball used it about 32% of his runs last year. And then the team that uses it the most is the Rams, using a ton of duo now. And that would just be such a fun fit. I don't know if fantasy managers would like it, but it would be such a fun fit.
Kyron Williams is just going to keep being ranked way too low and finishing as the top 5 running back, and we're going to have to live with it. I do want to move on because we've still got 3 backs left. Quinshon Judkins. Now this, Matt, is your favorite Buckeye running back. Is he the second best pure rusher in this class?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a very close third, maybe there, or I'd say they're tied for second is my guy Tahj Brooks. But I would say that Judkins, when you look at what he can do, he's proven he can play in a man gap scheme, that he can run in his own scheme. So the versatility at playing at a high level in both those schemes exists. He's a tackle breaker. When I looked at my finished data, by the way, look at Omarion Hampton, he bounced off, he was able to bounce off 80% of the hits that he had against defensive linemen this year. That's pretty high. Jeanty was 7 for 7, by the way, in that at 100%. And Martinez was just above Hampton. Judkins, though, against linebackers is higher than Hampton. He's at an 89% rate, whereas Hampton was an 85% rate. Still good, and with Judkins, he was the best against defensive backs, 11 to 12, 92%, whereas Hampton was 14 to 19 for 74%. So Judkins does all those things well in between the tackles. He has enough burst to get outside. He has the speed to flip the field and maybe even break away at times. And he has pretty good hands that I think will get better in terms of what you're looking for, because the flaws that he has are minor, and even receivers have them when they come into the league and clean it up. He'll be a good leak option, for checkdowns and screenplays, and that's all you're looking for there. And he has shown some propensity to be able to win one-on-one against linebackers with man routes. He's shown the techniques that you're looking for that will translate to that. So yeah, I think that, for me, when you're scoring pre-draft, what's more important is what are the number of things a player can do at a high level that a running back position allots for. And because you don't know where he's going to land. Every once in a while, we do get the stupidity factor in the NFL where a team picks somebody that does not match what the team wants to do because the GM and the coach are in a contest in a spitting contest, basically, and don't get along well. And the GM decides we're going to pick this guy because this is my team. And the coach is like, no, this is my offense. And yeah, I know you picked the Sam Laporta type, but I need a run blocker. So I'm going to fatten this guy's behind up and render him useless, And I even wrote that about Laporta a couple years ago. And I had a scout write me laughing, going, this happens way more often than most people realize. So I appreciate the fact that he said Laporta can be good as long as this dynamic doesn't happen. So Judkins is a better fit for a wider range of teams. And my dog is a linebacker. He does not like Quinshon Judkins. You can hear his protest in the background.
Jacob, what do the numbers say about Judkins? And what do you think like we talk about with Henderson, his teammate, the PPR upside is the thing that kind of elevates Henderson maybe in that format. What do you think Judkins' receiving upside is?
I think that he looks natural as a receiver at times. Like, so if you watch the film, I think that you could project it, but it does have to be a projection. He did not have a route rate. So it was like the percentage of the team's dropbacks he ran a route on was below 50% in all 3 of his seasons. And so I did an exercise trying to find comparisons for Judkins, because not only does he have that, but he has really middling rushing efficiency metrics. And so what I did is I looked up running backs who scored 200 or more PPR points in a season. He did that all 3 seasons at the collegiate level. But they also had a route rate below 50%, and then found running backs who were similar to him in having low rushing success rate, a high stuffed rate, and low yards after contact, which, basically they're getting there through volume. And the running backs that profile similarly since 2017 are Ty Chandler, Bryce Love, Kevin Harris, Izzy Abanikanda, Chase Brown, Braylon Allen, and Nick Chubb. That's not a great list, but it's, Nick Chubb is on that list. Braylon Allen could be good. Is he Nick Chubb? Some people compare him to Nick Chubb. And like, if he is Nick Chubb, then fine. Maybe none of this will matter. But I do have concerns when I dig into his profile, just making sense of it, because he looks good as a rusher to me. Matt, I want to ask you specifically about 2023, his final season at Ole Miss. He had a 41% rushing success rate and averaged 4.3 yards per rush. And if you compare that to the running backs in Ole Miss's backfield that weren't him, they had 114 carries combined. So it's not a tiny sample size. They had a 55% rushing success rate and 5.8 yards per rush. Do you have any insight as to why the metrics were so bad? 4.3 yards per rush at Ole Miss in 2023.
Yeah, this is the classic Tony Pollard, Ezekiel Elliott debate that happens everywhere, where you get the smaller back who gets a smaller amount of touches, who's speedier, and who's used in scenarios where defenses are thinking possibly pass a little bit more. And they're not high leverage situations where they're not getting the short yardage looks. They're not getting the goal line looks as often.
I actually removed his goal line runs and his short yardage runs, and it did
good
4.4 instead of 4.3. He still only averaged 1 yard before contact, which is
but that's still, when you still look at it though, if you have Quinshon Judkins on, if you had Ezekiel Elliott on the field and it's still like near his prime, and you have early career Tony Pollard on the field in his prime, which one are defenses going to say, oh yeah, we need to pay more attention to that guy? Which ones are going to actually, how do they respond in terms of reading keys? Their early keys are going to be on Elliott more often than their early keys were going to be on Tony Pollard, at least during the earlier part of those looks. Also, how many men in the box and how he handles those types of things. That's why, like, the value of the data that you presented certainly has a good layer of information to it, and it's definitely worth looking into. I would also argue, though, that with the context of how does the player deal with situations that are difficult, and I would argue that, like, I looked at like the Tampa backs last year. People were like begging to get Bucky Irving on the field, but watching those plays, Irving oftentimes received the types of plays that you look at that and go, it really didn't matter who was running the ball in that offense based on the play decisions that they gave and the down and distance decisions that they gave. The other players on that backfield would have earned positive enough yards that we wouldn't be overly concerned about it.
Yeah, just the last thing I'll add is that he did have the highest career light boxes faced rate of any running back that I evaluated. So this is the percentage of runs that came with 6 or fewer defenders in the box.
Sure.
That shocked me. And it's
Yeah.
I just don't know what to make of him. And I worry that like if he doesn't have rushing efficiency, he's going to have a hard time getting there in fantasy because the receiving's probably not going to be there.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing is that when you look at it from that standpoint, you also understand that at Ole Miss, they ran more of a spread offense. So the boxes are going to be lighter, but still you're going to see situations where if you have 6 men in the box, that may seem like a light box, but if you only have five linemen and you don't have a tight end in there, and it's still from a man-to-man box count scenario, the defense still is going to have the advantage on a lot of those plays. So really, when you scheme it up, sometimes like that context is important.
Okay.
That's awesome stuff, guys, and exactly what we were hoping to do. We've got 2 backs left, and I want to get Matt out of here. Kaleb Johnson is RB5 according to the consensus, Matt. And this is one of those guys. And you mentioned Bucky Irving. We saw it with Bucky Irving last year, maybe for different reasons, but went to the combine. Everybody hated what he did at the combine. He fell down dynasty ranks. Then he got on the field. He's soared up dynasty ranks. Do we even care what happened with Kaleb Johnson at the combine?
No, because he's an outside zone runner. That's the best thing he does. Now he can run gap. He can run, counter and different types of things effectively. But what he does really well is kind of the longer runway outside zone type of approach to his game. He is the biggest issues with him are more about pass protection. That's where he has some struggles with his game. And that's the only difference that really knocked him down my rankings overall, but his score overall is very close to an instant starter, which means that an instant starter in any situation that you would put him in. If you put him in outside zone, he's going to be one of my top 3 to 5 backs. And that's most likely what's going to happen because everybody I know and their mother who was like who's in football has been saying, for years, or not for years, but for months has basically been saying, yeah, I mean, Kaleb Johnson, he's the classic case of a pure outside zone guy. That's going to fit well for him. So he can plug in a play immediately. Just because he ran a slower number than everybody else in this fast 40 combine scenario doesn't mean anything to me. He still ran that number. That allows you to say he's fast enough, and to me, fast enough is, can you flip the field? Can you get, honestly, fast enough for me is, can you beat some linebackers on occasion? Not whether you can beat cornerbacks and safeties, because count the number of runs that you have that are impactful. And most of those runs aren't 40, 50, 60-yard runs. They're 10 to 15-yard runs.
His speed shows up on film. He's beating linebackers a lot if you watch him play.
Yep.
I do worry about the outside zone specific fit because if you look at the teams that use a lot of outside zone, not many of them actually need running backs in this draft. So you've got the Atlanta Falcons number 1, San Francisco 49ers could take him, but obviously you have CMC. The Saints, so that play caller is now in Seattle. They don't need a running back. The Lions, the Texans, they have a new play caller from the McVay tree. Don't even know if they'll be using as much outside zone. The Jets, new play caller from Detroit. So probably outside zone, but they don't really need a running back. The Dolphins, the Panthers, the Vikings, none of them really need a running back.
Dolphins are interesting.
Yeah, I think the best fit by far is the Steelers. I think Arthur Smith would love to have Kaleb Johnson. The only thing there, though, is they only have 2 top 100 picks. They have 21 and then they have 83. So if he falls to 83, perfect. But if he goes to somebody in the second round that isn't a good fit, like I would be pretty worried because they're really drastic splits between his outside zone runs and all of his other runs.
Would you say, Matt, landing spot matters more for Johnson or for Henderson?
I would say it probably matters more. I would say it's about equal, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because it's just for different reasons. And when you look at Johnson, here's the other thing is that, I think that when you look at plugging it in it's a good way to look at it is to say, let's plug in the player to the scheme fit or the coaches and what they have and what's going on. But also, if they draft a player that early, it's more likely that they will decide they're going to try and opt for a different scheme.
Sure.
They're going to make an adjustment to their scheme. But I think he's going to fall to 80. I don't think he's going to be a first or second round pick. I think he's probably going to be more like a fourth round pick, or maybe even a fifth round pick.
The other thing I had on Johnson is he only had 36 pass pro reps in 2024. That was the fourth lowest in the class. So they didn't have him protect very often. He only had 22 receptions in his final season, only 29 for his career. And, you know, context, it is Iowa, which doesn't pass very much. But still, it's a projection if you're expecting him to play more than early downs. And so now we're getting really specific and really thin margins for this player. And in a class with a lot of running backs who have, you know, a lot more variable paths to success, I'd be very, very hesitant to take Kaleb Johnson unless the draft fit just feels perfect.
And I think the numbers are a good thing in the standpoint of like, it's about how you color in the lines compared to other, you know, and staying in the box from that standpoint. One of the things that I like about being able to chart players is that because all data is a small sample size in the NFL. I mean, it's too small to be unbelievably predictable, just like, you know, so. But one of the things that you try and do is you look for techniques that can be predictable. And he lacks some of those techniques. So even with what you're saying with the small sample size and that being worrisome, I'd add on, if you're even going to go the opposite end and say, well, looking at the context of what he did on the field and showing technique and concept, he had some issues that he has to work on.
There may have been a reason it was a small sample size. This is what you're saying.
I think it's totally fair to think that Damien Martinez and Cam Skattebo are just better players. You know, and that's to me where we get into this range with him is like, these guys I feel safer with, and then they also might honestly be better rushers. Like,
well, I will tell you, Jacob, that was an excellent transition. Matt has both Damien Martinez and Cam Skattebo as better ranked higher in his pre-draft running back rankings. And then you made a special request, Jacob, and we like to honor your request, especially after I made the number 1 overall pick reference earlier in the show. And so you sent me an email. You said, can I please, I'm requesting 2 to 3 minutes to do a quick deep dive on Skattebo.
Yeah, Skattebo can do so much. So first, I just want to say career scrimmage yards per game, 135. Ashton Jeanty's 141. 2024 scrimmage yards per game, 178. Ashton Jeanty, 196. Like elite producer. And then if you look at the way that he did that, watch the film, and then also if you want to contextualize it with the stats, no matter what your process is, I think you'll come to the conclusion that he is a very, very complete back as a receiver, as a runner. The one clear red flag is his pass protection. I'm curious to hear Matt's take on that. But unlike a lot of college backs, he did some non-shotgun running. Most of these systems are almost exclusively shotgun, but Arizona State did use some under center runs. He was more effective on those than he was on shotgun runs. Arizona State also used a really balanced schematic rushing attack, tons of counters, man and gap concepts, good mix of inside and outside zone runs. That to me is exciting. I think that he can do a lot of different things. I think he's at his best on the man gap runs, which makes sense given his skill set. But he has experience with all of it. I just loved his film. Jump cuts are awesome. Powerful leg drive to work around or through defenders. And he's also, I think, really great at manipulating space, whether that's blockers or just creating angles to beat defenders with deceptive movements prior to contact. He's creative. He has contact balance. I think, like, in a lot of ways, he's not nearly as athletic as Ashton Jeanty, but in a lot of ways, in the ways that he wins, it's sort of similar to Jeanty. He's very, very difficult to tackle. He has a very low center of gravity and very strong legs. And all that is borne out in his avoided tackle rates. 38% career avoided tackle rate for Ashton Jeanty, 35% for Cam Skattebo. And that only increased as he played better competition, which I think is noteworthy as well. I just think he's legitimately one of the best rushers in the class, and he offers receiving upside if he's able to get onto the field, which could be a problem because of his pass protecting. But if you just look at his receiving production in college, nearly 1,400 career receiving yards, 605 in his final season. The only two other running backs that have been drafted in the NFL since 2017 to have 600 or more receiving yards in a season are Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Gainwell. His career yard per route run rate is 1.84. For reference, Saquon Barkley was 1.96. It's elite territory. Bucky Irving was 1.45. TreVeyon Henderson was 1.21. Skattebo was 1.84. And then last season, when he had 600 yards, it was 2.27. That was better than any rate Saquon ever had. So to me, he's very complete. And I think he could, any team that he lands on, I think he's going to be able to carve out a role. And I think he's the kind of guy, kind of like Tahj Brooks, where a team could just fall in love with him. An offensive line is going to fall in love with him. Coaching staff is going to fall in love with him. My ideal fit is pair him with the Cowboys and let Javonte Williams handle the pass blocking. I think if he gets to a situation like that, he could do what Bucky Irving did, where he just slowly takes over the lead back role. And by the end of the season, he's getting all of the important touches.
So, Matt, this is Jacob perfectly highlighted the question that I wanted to ask. There are people who just absolutely love Cam Skattebo. And then there are people, and like maybe it's just because, like Tyler Shuck, you can't say Cam Skattebo's name the right way if you're reading his name because it doesn't look like what it sounds like. And that is, but why do you think that he is such a polarizing running back prospect?
I think that part of that is that it depends on how people evaluate the game.
Yeah.
So some people are much more superficial in how they evaluate the game, and they may not see the level of skill that he displays. And so I think there's always been a level of superficiality with that. There's also maybe that on a level of maybe big draft level of media that they may also talk to scouts a little bit more to inform their opinions about where these guys are going to go. So their evaluations are more about where this guy's going to get drafted as much as it is about looking at talent. I try to look at an unvarnished look at talent and then focus after the draft of what opportunities are going to look like and help that for fantasy players, because you're not going to learn about football just listening to somebody say, well, because somebody at NFL.com, who I'm not banging on anybody, they're very talented people and do great work, but they're trying to deliver for you where these guys are going to get drafted. I'm trying to deliver for you who I think is going to be good, and not with the risk management exercise of who owners want to invest the most in. So they may talk to somebody like Cam Skattebo and look at him and or look at talk to coaches or talk to scouts, and scouts may say, maybe there's some maturity issues there. Maybe there's some things off the field that we have to be concerned about, and they may be lowering him a little bit, baking that into it. I can't say he has any of that for sure. But I can say the only thing everything that Jacob said, I thought was, great analysis, and I wouldn't add anything to his game from that, anything to add about that other than that as a pass protector, as Jacob led off with, is that, if he wants to shorten his career, he can continue doing what he's doing as a pass protector, get concussed a few times, and then he will have a shorter career than what we thought Tua Tagovailoa was about to have, because he does not use his hands. He literally, it's like he comes off the ropes in AEW, WWE, and leads with the head, into the chest. He's like trying to be Earl Campbell against the LA Rams in that iconic run where he lowers his head into the chest of a defender, and he does that repeatedly. He gives up sacks, he gives up pressures, he forces quarterbacks to run for their lives because he's trying to kill people with the front of his helmet than he is trying to do things in a technically sound fashion. If he can fix that, he's at the very least comparable to a David Montgomery type of back. I would say he's even a back who I thought was better than that, but unfortunately had some maturity issues off the field, and how he approached his professionalism of trying to stay on the field was Ontario Smith from way back in the day. He runs a lot like Ontario Smith, low center of gravity, great balance, good quickness, the ability to make people miss, run through them, run over them, run around them, and a good pass receiver. Smith was a terrific back. He just, he had other priorities. Right. I'd say higher priorities probably make sense. Pun intended.
That is Cam Skattebo. That is part one of the rookie running back preview. Thank you to Jacob. Thank you to Thomas. Thank you so much for being here, Matt. One more time, just tell everybody where they can find the RSP and what you've got coming up.
Sure. MattWaldman.com. Post-draft will be coming no later than a week after the third day of the NFL draft. And you get both for $21.95. 20 years of doing this. Certainly I appreciate you guys having me on. It's been fun meeting you, Jacob, and I appreciated us getting a chance to have a good conversation about a variety of things, both analytical, data-wise, and from a football perspective from the film. So this was great.
Yeah, this was awesome. Sorry I went long, Heath. I had so many questions I could ask Matt. We could have been here for 3 hours easily.
Well, the good news is Jacob will be back on Tuesday for the running back preview part 2. We will talk to you on Tuesday.